It's the Real News Network. I'm Sharmini Pires coming to you from Baltimore. Last week, United States and Israel signed a new 10-year military aid agreement under which the U.S. will provide Israel with $38 billion. According to the Congressional Research Service, this represents a 22% increase over the amount that was dispersed to Israel in 2014 and 2013. But this is still less than the $50 billion that Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu had asked for. Joining us now to take a closer look at the impact of the MOU and the leadership of the Israeli government that we will be handing this money over to is Larry Wilkerson. He is a retired United States Army soldier and former Chief of Staff to the United States Secretary of State, Colin Powell. He's also an adjunct professor at the College of William and Mary, where he teaches a course on U.S. national security. Thanks for joining us, Larry.
Good to be back, Sharmini.
So, Larry, how concerned are you about this MOU?
I think this is a reflection of what the administration, the Obama administration, has been saying all along, and it's being sort of low-keyed by my political party, his opponents. But they have been more supportive of Israel than any other administration since 1948. That support has been substantive support, despite the fact that Netanyahu and President Obama seem personally not to get along very well. And there's ample reason on President Obama's side not to, including the rather awkward and bizarre performance of Prime Minister Netanyahu before a joint session of Congress in defiance of the President of the United States policies. That has been a subterfuge or a camouflage of a very, very close relationship, closer than under any other president, military intelligence sharing, all the aspects of missile defense, research and development, and actual execution and use of those defenses. A number of things have grown tighter. They've grown more collegial, if you will, particularly military to military relations, intelligence to intelligence relations. So bottom line, this president has made the relationship with Israel even stronger than previous presidents and made it even more along the lines of what I've been saying for a long time, dangerous for both countries when their interests are determined by both leaderships to be congruent, when in fact they often aren't.
Now, Larry, you indicated offline when we were talking about this, that this kind of agreement lasting 10 years, no matter who's in power in Israel, is unusual. Tell us more about that.
I don't recall, and I, as I've said before, I'm not an expert on arms sales, foreign military sales, and agreements like this, but I don't recall us ever having this long a period inked, if you will, in contractual form for these various types of assistance. And I also noted, as you pointed out, that we've changed the terms of the aid. We no longer allow a portion of it, a goodly portion of it, to go to Israeli arms and to Israeli research and development of arms and so forth. It all, or nearly all, has to be spent in the United States now. And this reflects, I think, the growing influence of the military-industrial complex. Not only do we have this more or less Israel's lawyer relationship between the U.S. and Israel, where we do their beck and call, but we also have a situation where if Congress is going to give them a ton of money, they're going to make sure that the Israelis spend it back in the United States. That's a reflection, if you will, of both of the bad sides of the United States Congress.
Now, Larry, something unusual is happening this year. If we haven't noticed, it is an election year. And there is, according to the Republican House, I understand there's over 300,000 U.S. citizens living in Israel who plans to vote in the U.S. elections. How much does this agreement have to do with that?
I really don't think it has a lot to do with it. I think this is more political, and it's become almost entirely political. It's not strategic anymore. Israel is not a strategic asset for the United States. It is a strategic liability. there are a number of hard power facts to that strategic liability, not least of which is American hard power is in Bahrain, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Oman. It's in other places in Israel. There's nothing in Israel to speak of. And we would never think of going to Israel with major armed forces to combat any threat or enemy in the region. So it's a liability, it's not an asset. The relationship itself can be said to be a strategic asset because America feels like it needs to support Israel, and Israel feels like it needs that support. So the symbiosis, the exchange of that relationship could be called strategic, but it is fraught with liability for both of us now. And I think what we see reflected in this growing relationship, the tighter relationship, military to military, intel to intel, more money. And by the way, Sharmini, this is money that the United States Congress is granting to a country at a rate that would put $1,000 or better in the hands of every Israeli citizen if you just parceled it out in that respect. And we're talking about a country that has one of the most successful economies in the Mediterranean, if not the world. What are we doing giving all of this U.S. hard-earned taxpayer money to this country that is already fairly successful, if not eminently successful? You need to start asking basic questions like that when the Congress does things like it's done with this agreement.
No, Congress would reply to that question saying, yes, but, you know, we have this new feature which you mentioned that now they have to spend all this money in U.S. Arms manufacturers, and it's going to go back to the U.S. pockets or U.S. corporate pockets. How do you think the Israel business and the military-industrial complex, particularly because that's a very big industry in Israel, is going to respond to this particular part of the agreement?
Well, part of their subsidies, as it were, are going to be eliminated. I don't think it's going to curb their zeal for producing arms or their zeal for going elsewhere to sell those arms. This is another point I've mentioned many times. They've sold, for example, unmanned aerial vehicles, so-called drones, to the Russians. They've sold arms to China. They'll sell arms wherever there's money to be made. We all remember the relationship with South Africa, where Israel was actually helping the apartheid government in South Africa develop nuclear weapons and working with them on other weapons research and sales of weapons and so forth. So this is a state that acts in a very realpolitik fashion when it comes to many things, but certainly when it comes to arms. They'll sell arms to almost anyone to make money. So that there you might say is a perverse incentive for them to even do more of that, because we are subtracting, as it were, some of the money we were giving them from their own ability to manufacture arms. And
finally, Larry, so this agreement, as we both have mentioned, is going to last 10 years and a very large amount of money that Israel is going to be receiving, unprecedented amounts of money. But who are we handing this money over to when it comes to the leadership of Israel?
Let me make one comment, too, before I address that question. When we used to have our budget meetings at the State Department, you know, we don't get a lot of money for soft power. When you subtract the 3.4, 3.8 now, 3.9, whatever, going to Israel, and then a complementary amount going to Egypt, essentially bribing them to continue the peace treaty, to continue to adhere to the peace treaty with Israel, when you subtract that $6+ billion, now over $7 billion, from the State Department's soft power budget, you don't have much left. So we're talking about the Congress limiting the State Department's soft power budget, if you will, to the chicken feed because of the dispensations we have to make in behalf of Israel. Whom is this money going to? Well, this money is increasingly going to a security complex that comprises 51, 52, 53% of the state of Israel. We're talking about a country that has destroyed its labor movement. You've had Shir Haver on. Shir Haver has pointed this out in no uncertain terms. They've destroyed their labor movement. They're going after the non-Jewish citizens of the country in a way that is looking increasingly like the apartheid they already have in the West Bank and Jerusalem. And they have centered the wealth of the country in the hands of 60 or 70 families. It's looking a lot like Thomas Piketty describes France and the United States in his book, Capitalism in the 21st Century, the worst maldistribution of wealth in any capitalist state in a long time. And this is a recipe for more and more national security state-like actions, because what you're doing is concentrating all this wealth in the hands of people who believe in that national security state and want to maintain it and even increase its power.
Right, and then of course it is uncertain who will actually be receiving this money in the long term, because Netanyahu himself is wavering in terms of his leadership and position within the government.
We could have an outcome. I think the elections are scheduled for March, if I'm not mistaken. We could have an outcome there that'll be very different from the one Netanyahu contemplated when he called for the elections.
All right, Larry, I thank you so much.
I don't think, Sharmini, that we'll have a whole lot of change, though, in the nature of the leadership. I'm hoping I'm wrong, but it looks like the competition, which might wrest power away from Netanyahu, is more or less appealing to the same interests Netanyahu does and did, only with a little more sophistication.
All right. I'm sure you're going to be keeping an eye on this, so we hope to have you back on this matter soon, Larry. Thanks.
Thanks for having me, Sharmini.
And thank you for joining us on the Real News Network.